What will the FBI look like in the Trump administration? Blaze Media senior editor for politics Chris Bedford asked Representative Chip Roy what he wants to see from Kash Patel if he's confirmed to lead the bureau. Take a look.
Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you, Chris. How are you?
Fantastic. Not enjoying Texas. I'm stuck in the swamp, although at least the weather's a little better than it has been recently. Were you able to catch the hearings that we've had on yesterday? Basically the last series of contentious hearings, in particular on Kash Patel.
So today I've been, in Texas visiting with folks, but I saw the hearing with Bobby Kennedy. I think he did a great job swatting back on Bernie Sanders, a bunch of others. Obviously, Kash had his hearing today. I've been getting updates throughout the day. And, I think he did a pretty good job, from what I understand, of pushing back on what were clearly a kind of coordinated attacks by the Democrats. I mean, pulling up old photos because he gives a photo line with somebody and trying to accuse them of being racist and things like that is just absurd. But those are the kinds of things you expect out of our Democratic colleagues, who didn't even show up, by the way, to Russ Vought's hearing over for OMB today, which is just ridiculous. So look, it was unanimous, 11-0 vote to get Russ Vought out of the committee. So I hope it'll be similar for Kash. They need to move him out quickly.
Exactly, and I know the Senate is overseeing the confirmations, but in the end, with your seat on House Judiciary, you'll be overseeing and actually trying to get answers. For the last couple of years, you've been trying to get answers out of the Department of Justice. On the FACE Act, for example, your legislation trying to get to the bottom of why the Democrat DOJ has been targeting pro-lifers while ignoring pro-abortion terrorism against crisis pregnancy centers and a host of other different problems. Have you had any contact with Kash or with any of his people that would give you some kind of make you feel that you're going to finally get to the bottom of some of these things, get the answers that you've been seeking for the last 4 years from the DOJ?
Yeah, well, Kash and I have a lot of mutual friends, and I know him. I've been leaving him alone. He's got to get through the confirmation hearing. But once he gets through and once he gets confirmed, which I expect him to be, we'll certainly be in contact about what needs to be changed at the FBI. And notably, you pointed out what's been going on with the FACE Act prosecutions, which, of course, is both a Department of Justice broader problem with the prosecutions and what they do through the prosecutors there in the U.S. attorney's offices, but also with respect to the FBI. We had all of these individuals who 97% of the FACE Act prosecutions were against pro-life individuals. We've had, individuals put in jail. In Texas, a 75-year-old woman in bad health who was put in jail, who thankfully was pardoned by the president along with 20 others. But we need to reverse that, repeal the FACE Act, but importantly, put reforms in place for the FBI when what they've been doing with their abuses, not just with respect to the FACE Act, but obviously FISA, as well as what they were doing in coordination with the Department of Justice with the J6 individuals. We had doors getting knocked down, individuals in my district that were getting arrested, literally, that had their doors knocked down, way after the events occurred. We had two grandmas who were arrested going from Austin out to Fredericksburg in the Hill Country last year for what occurred on January 6th. So I'm glad the president has, pardoned those individuals. It was a politicized process. The FBI needs to be reformed from top to bottom. It needs to be focused on working with local law enforcement to root out organized crime, to root out cartels, to stop sex trafficking, to stop the dangerous flow of narcotics, to stop the flow of fentanyl, not to be used to go after so-called terrorism and then be used to target Americans in the name of rooting out terrorism. That's just wrong.
You've been on the J6 prosecutions for a long time, where a lot of other Republicans kind of took a step back. They seemed afraid of being able to actually talk about it. And after the pardons, you actually personally went down to the D.C. jail, where the releases were slower than they really ought to have been. Are you at this point now satisfied with the Department of Justice and the different prisons that they've actually listened to the order, or are there still languishing issues?
There's still languishing issues. I mean, some have been released. And that day we went down, I think 3 more were released. I think a few more have been released, and we need to follow up. My staff's been working with Eli Crane and Scott Perry and Lauren Boebert and others that were down there that day, and generally to try to make sure that these individuals are freed up. I know there's been some real problems with some of the individuals involved. And this is part for the course. This is why we need to, tear this stuff up root and branch. We need Kash to go in there and really reform the FBI, but also for Pam Bondi to reform the Department of Justice from top to bottom. It shouldn't be a politicized department. The scales of justice must be blindfolded. And I gave a floor speech last week on this point. People say, well, Chip, aren't you bothered? There were people who did some things they shouldn't have done on January 6th. I've been very open about that. There were people who did things that were deserving of prosecution. There were doors that were smashed in. There were police officers that were assaulted. There were things that were done. But when you politicize 1,500 prosecution, and when the FBI and the Department of Justice is used to target Americans because you want to have a political result, then you have completely removed the blindfolds from the scales of justice. And that must be the thing that we restore. Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, their charge is to restore the Justice Department and the FBI to actually defend the rule of law. Focus on criminals, focus on the things that you're supposed to do, and work with local law enforcement to restore people's belief in the criminal justice system.
Where do you think the FBI and the DOJ got on the wrong track? Was this politicization just laid bare under Donald Trump's presidency and their reaction to it? Or is this something that's been building since the changes after 9/11 or even earlier?
I think both. I think, when you put that much power and consolidate it in Washington, the founders warned us of that. And that's something that we should be mindful of when we're going through all the spending exercises. One of the reasons I'm taking arrows right now from even some of my Republican colleagues, because I'm standing over here saying, hey, stop spending, stop writing these blank checks to the federal government, is because when you give them that money, they're going to use it. And they're going to use it against us in the end. And then we've seen that unfold. But I do think President Trump laid that bare. I think I think COVID has laid some of that bare. I think the J6 situation laid some of that bare. But importantly, I think we really went sideways when we started making the FBI be about terrorism in the wake of 9/11, because what that did was started to turn the FBI inward in data collection, right? Like, that's really the issue. And you saw Tulsi Gabbard, who was over there today testifying. And what did she did? She defended her position that we should have to have a warrant requirement with respect to FISA, which, by the way, 86 Republicans voted against last spring. We wanted to ensure that warrant requirement would be there. I think that was a mistake by Republicans. I think Tulsi was right to be saying that we need to reform that. And I think that when we had some senators that were questioning her on that, they should be the ones being questioned. We need to protect our civil liberties, and we need to diffuse the power out of the hands of a few. There were so many abuses of FISA by the FBI, 200,000 records that were pulled by the FBI to politically target American citizens. That's all known. And we had the FISA courts for chastising the FBI for the abuses. They tell us, don't worry, Chip, we put in all the fixes. Now, we put in some fixes last spring, but not enough. I got an amendment that was adopted that gives us quarterly reports and gives us a right to go before the FISA court to make sure they're doing it the right way. That's good, but we need the warrant requirement and we need more reform. Sorry, I didn't mean to filibuster, but those are all the things we need to do.
Well, that's great. No, you need an agenda. You actually need to be concrete. You can't just shake your fist at the wind and yell that the FBI needs to change without actually going into what needs to change and how you can restore an FBI that people have trust in. The kind of FBI that arrests serial killers, Hannibal Lecters, and other types, as opposed to grandmas leaving Austin a few years after trespassing.
And those evil individuals that are moving little girls and little children in the sex trafficking trade. Like, why don't we have the FBI focused on that? Focusing on the dangerous moving of fentanyl that is poisoning our kids. And that's what's happening. Tens of thousands of Americans dead from fentanyl poisoning. Tens of thousands of kids being trafficked, both Americans and, alien children that are being trafficked for profit. Why isn't the FBI focusing on that rather than hunting down a grandma because she crossed a bike rack on January 6th, 4 years ago? Like, that's what is driving the American people crazy. They want to return to not just justice, but common sense.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people were a lot of Trump supporters were excited to see the order that came out from Office of Management and Budget earlier this week that has since been kind of pulled back. Some of the instructions stay in place, cutting funding. The Democrats, of course, went wild. And I think some Republicans, it appeared, really lost their nerves at different pet projects that were getting impacted by this sort of thing. Now, you're not part of Russ Vogt, as you mentioned, just passed out of committee on Thursday. It looks like he'll probably get confirmed by the Senate. And then you and House Budget will be one of the groups that get to oversee him. Are you confident that there will be any kind of, or hopeful that there'll be any kind of return to that order, that this thing will be reviewed, that some of the spending will actually be able to be brought back under control under Russ's guidance?
Yeah, of course. First of all, Russ will do an excellent job. He did an excellent job at OMB. I think he's the only guy returning to the literal same job. That's how much confidence President Trump had in him the first go round and does this time. I'm glad that he got through the committee. He will do a great job of reviewing the expenditures. Frankly, I mean, he's going through the confirmation process. That memo went out because it was the right thing to do. Obviously, they pulled that back because you've got the litigation going forward. You got the court that issued an injunction. But I think the message was sent. Frankly, they kind of rope-a-doped him a little little bit. Now you got all these groups that have kind of exposed themselves to the ridiculous expenditures because they were crying foul. Well, now we know who a lot of them are, and now we need to go through the executive branch, through impoundment, through the congressional, funding process, whether it's appropriations or reconciliation, and we need to pull that money back. Of course, we need to review NGOs. And if anybody disagrees with that, you go campaign on funding NGOs to move illegal immigrants into our country. Like, of course, we need to review a lot of these programs like condoms to people in Afghanistan. I mean, it's insane. So those things, and that's like the peanuts of it, that's the small dollars, but they have a real big impact in terms of people's faith in our government when we're funding these ludicrous programs. And you're funding the very NGOs that weaken us, endanger us, move criminal aliens into our countries where individuals can get killed, like Jocelyn Nungray in Houston and other Americans who have died at the hands of dangerous criminals.
And you took some heat this week because you skipped out in the House conference down in Miami. But I guess maybe true to your expectations, it didn't seem like any kind of a plan was actually agreed on down in Miami, and the Republicans don't seem any closer to figuring out what they're exactly going to do with deportation and border security funding, the tax cuts and the tax reforms, or making the Trump tax cuts permanent. What is next for Congress? Everyone's been focused on what's going on in confirmations, but what is next for the House of Representatives that has to take the lead on this?
Yeah, good question. I mean, first of all, with respect to Miami, look, I decided not to go down there because my wife and my kids had some stuff back in Texas that I needed to take care of for them, and I had some personal responsibilities at home. I told the leadership that if they needed me there, I'd find a way to get there, but that at the end of the day, I knew what was going to happen, and it's exactly what did happen. And I'm not going to go talk about what happened in private meetings. I'm not one of those guys. That wasn't for the public consumption. They had a private conversation. But I will tell you in broad terms, yes, as many have said leaving that meeting, no decisions have been made. They are still kind of going around in circles about how much spending we should cut versus what the tax policy should be. You ask what is next for Congress. What should be next for Congress is to deliver immediately on President Trump's agenda. That's why I favor the two-step process. Let's get border funding done. Let's get some defense funding in place to get drones and to make sure that we have, an Iron Dome for America and all the things the president has a vision for. Let's give Pete Hegseth what he needs. Let's break that apart from the normal town appropriations process where all of the contractors decide our policy instead of our leaders. Let's give Pete those tools. Let's lift the debt ceiling for the president, but let's do it responsibly by pulling some cuts to undo some of the student loan stuff, to make sure we have Medicaid work requirements, to undo the EV mandates and those things, to pay for those things. And then let's have a debate about taxes and spending. But here's my bottom line. We must not increase deficits. We need to reduce deficits. And a lot of my Republican colleagues have never met a tax they didn't want to cut. Agreed. But they certainly have never made a program they don't want to increase. Disagree. I'm on the side of stopping the inflation tax for the American people, and I'm going to stand on that hill, and I'm going to fight for the American people so our kids and grandkids still have a country.
Congressman Chip Roy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. God bless. Take care.